this second part of our introduction to innovation, we'd like to talk about the basic elements of innovation. In the last lecture, we looked at how really any idea that makes it to the marketplace, by our definition of innovation in the first part of this lecture, any idea that's going to make it to the marketplace will have to satisfy two realms: an economic realm that involves people and how they interact and how they trade value with each other, and the physical reality of the universe. We can't violate laws of energy and momentum, for example, just because someone decides that we need to build a time machine and get that into the marketplace. And so there's a physical reality that has to set a boundary condition, as well as this human economic thing that people won't pay ridiculously high price for no value, for example, no matter how hard you try. So these two realms we talked about, and how the boundary condition is set in the middle for anybody who is going to want an innovation to reach to make an innovation, which is an idea that has impact and sits in the marketplace creating value. So that's where we left it last time. So let's look at these criteria a little bit more closely. So as you probably know in your experience in life, this seems very simple. We have to stay within the boundary conditions of what people essentially do and deliver value to each other, and we have to make sure that we don't violate principles of the universe. But interestingly enough, this kind of deterministic failure, that is, if I violate either one of those, I will fail for sure. That innovation cannot enter the marketplace. And as basic as this sounds, there's so many examples of people, even at this first thinking of innovation, even before we get to innovation elements. In general, people don't always reduce it to even this boundary condition. So hopefully this class is already valuable to you, and that you automatically start thinking about those two realms, and that you can't suspend the reality of those two realms. You cannot throw either one out. And to give you examples to bring this a little bit more home, if I look at physical reality only, and this is something that somebody who's really enamored with a particular property of an invention or science, I can ignore cost, whoever's going to use it, or I picture that I'm the user. This is a common mistake, that I am the customer. There's these rare cases, of course, like Steve Jobs, where he happens to know who the average customer that he's targeting really is. But in general, for example, scientists and engineers are poor. They have poor knowledge of what a customer might actually want. Although, again, you shouldn't throw out natural instincts. There's some very basic things which everybody knows they would want, right? So physical reality, you could ignore cost. You might ignore or think that someone is a common user, and they're not really that. They're unusual, and they're not really representing the whole marketplace. You could look at demand, because you could think that there doesn't seem to be any demand, but I'm going to ignore that. So these are kind of people that want to ignore the human realm, basically. And of course, we have the same problem on the other side. Sometimes people think that, if I know what people want, I know they need a time machine. That's my favorite example. And it's only a matter of raising enough money, and we'll basically make a time machine. And that oftentimes they'll ignore technological limits, practicality, a variety of other things. Now, there's plenty of examples where people ignore these things, and actually they end up with great innovations. But of course, you're talking about improbable events. And so that's looking at someone, for example, that goes to Las Vegas and hits 00. That's interesting in a way, but kind of not really relevant to trying to figure out how to earn growth and return over long periods of time. What we're talking about here is we want to think about innovation, technology, and how we can create value over time, not random one-shot examples. Unfortunately, such examples are repeated many times in society, and they drive all sorts of behavior, again, that ignores either human or physical reality, human realm or physical realm. But hopefully, this is a good warning to you. Andy Grove, the previous CEO of Intel, during its very high growth years, used to refer to this as intellectual honesty. For example, Intel is a company that had to encounter physical reality and human realm over and over again in intense ways, their entire growth curve for the entire company's history. And Andy Grove defined this, what I'm talking about here, as intellectual honesty, in the sense that you cannot suspend the reality of either realm. There is a thing in humans that wants to ignore these, and I see it in myself, and I've fortunately been able to correct it most of the time in my entrepreneurial efforts. But there is this sort of look the other way, I hope it goes away kind of thing, and you've all experienced that, and that's what we're talking about here. You have to face reality. There's integrity, by one definition, is the ability to face reality and deal with it. And so, I think if you're going to be involved in innovation, be involved in a high growth economy. To a large extent, when we're not in bubble times and we're not in abnormal growth paradigms, to work in this kind of world, which is great for everyone, it takes a tremendous amount of integrity to be intellectually honest. So let's break this down further. I think we've talked enough about the physical reality realm and the human realm, but let's break that down a little further. So, I can imagine then that I have certain things like science and technology and invention. Those are things that are certainly in the physical realm. One of the things that we have to remember, and we're going to come back to this later, is that, in this realm, there's new and old of these. That is, just because there's a bias towards new technology and new science, because we might be adding a missing piece that, when combined with old technologies, creates some sort of new thing. And that's, of course, what happens a lot when you're in, and we'll talk about this later, innovation paradigm. When you're in an innovation paradigm, oftentimes a lot of the other parts of innovation are abstracted and removed from your view, and you just need to plug in the next piece of key science or technology, and it's a little bit easy to ignore the rest of the innovation process in that case. But here we're backing up and saying, look, we're going to make we're trying to find out the generic process of innovation no matter what's going on in our time period. And so new and old science and new and old technology, new and old inventions can all be relevant, actually. Now, there's kind of another part of physical reality, like industry. What does the current industry look like? What do their plants look like, if there is production plants, or if there's intellectual property instead? Maybe in the software business you're doing licenses or whatever, or maybe they're patents. These are things in the physical realm, but you can already tell they're a little bit different from this side over here, and I'll get to that in a minute. Even geography, right? It's physical, but if let's suppose there's some industry, in China, and then there's some industry in the U.S., we already know that these are important factors on how innovation might proceed. And so certainly geography is physical, but it matters, right? So I purposely have listed, and of course here too, you have new and old as well. There could be shifting geographical constraints, and there can be industrial changes occurring because of technologies already happening, And intellectual property can be having a burst somewhere, and there could be changes to the intellectual property, patent office, things like that. So again, you can't just think of what's happening new. You have to understand what has happened, what exists, and what may still exist from before. So that's breaking down the physical reality realm. These are just examples, by the way. I'll just put EG up. Let me just put my pen on here. EG for examples, because I could have extensive lists on either side. I just want to give you an idea of how we're going to break this down by looking at the components of these two realms, and we're going to make some new definitions. So in the human realm, we have a similar type of situation, except that in the human realm, we want to think about use of things, application. So I may have pieces of technology and science, let's say in the physical realm, but how do I use them so that humans get a buyer surplus? And this is actually a very, very important definition. So buyer surplus is where, and we'll talk about this later, buyer surplus is where when you buy something, you get some value out of it that's not recorded by anyone else that delivers the stuff to you. So if I buy a pizza, my buyer surplus is it tastes good and I like it. The guy who sold me the pizza doesn't get that. I get that for buying that pizza. So whatever value that I get out of the thing, that's called the buyer surplus. The price is what I am willing to pay the person that produces that for my buyer surplus. And of course, wants are in here, because even though I think about how I use it, it's not always just a utility argument of why I buy things. I could want things for various reasons, right? So these are just examples of, the human realm. And again, with our old friend Steve Jobs, he's really an excellent example when we think about innovation, because you can really see how creating things that people want that are not always apparent. So, in this case, we tend to focus on the old, right? So in other words, existing wants and existing uses we tend to focus on. And of course, uninnovative business people say, we know that there's a demand for laptops, so let's keep on making more. But of course, Apple said, well, there's a slight different version, and we can appeal to a new market in that people want to sit on their couches and read stuff and have a consumption device and maybe not have it actually be such a good input device. Very subtle difference, but it turns out it's quite a new market, and it's caused a tablet to explode from a market perspective. So again, new and old in the human realm regarding all these factors. And again, I'll put EG here too, because remember, these are just examples. There's like a long list. And then in the human realm, we have also things like cost. Now notice here that even though I have price over here in the human realm, how much am I willing to pay to get the buyer surplus? I still have to make the thing, and it costs me a certain amount. Now that's not really the same kind of category, right? So up here, just like we had two different categories, there's kind of this other category that involves more the practical reality of how I get to the human realm. And you can think about these over here as the practical reality of how do I get to the science, technology, innovation. So these are physical realm, but they're kind of how do I exploit this? And again, if I want to satisfy these human needs over here, these are kind of in the human realm, but I have to do them to kind of expose and satisfy this human realm. Another example that is business model. I have to have some sort of business model that ends up connecting cost and price, so that the difference between these is called margin. And that's important because that's profit, which allows my company to continue and spread and get exponential return. And then of course there's strategy, which people like to talk about, which is really people getting together in the company and deciding how to do something, and it's going to involve people outside the company because they're the people that want to use or want things. So again, it's the human realm, but it's kind of more like an execution thing as opposed to, what the people at the end or the business at the end really want, right? And of course, there's new and old there. There might be changes to things that change the cost structure, or there could be something that, the cost is commoditized and it's a commodity and it'll be forever this old thing. So again, you got to think about how, or strategies that, went away will come back because there has been change. We'll talk about that more later. So we've broken this down into these two realms. Now we're going to make some definitions. So we're gonna take the upper left corner where the science and technology and invention, and I think it's pretty easy to see. One of the big differences is new and old, but technology is going to be that realm, and then I think if you look in the physical reality realm, these kinds of things that are needed to execute over here, we're going to call that implementation. So we need to do these things in the physical realm to implement these technologies and create an overall innovation. So, if you think about it, in this industrial structure and things like that, and geography and intellectual property, they're physical, but they're methods of implementing science and technology into satisfying the human realm. And then over in human realm space, it's pretty, I guess, straightforward to see that use, want, what people get, the price. These are all in the market category. When we say market, by the way, I want to make a very important distinction. Market is really market application. I don't just mean like market surveys. Every time you put market there, there's this like business 101 interpretation of that. Just like, our interpretation of technology is not an engineering definition of technology, right? It's more inclusive of old and new technology and things like that. Same thing here. This is not just a market survey. Market, we're talking about use and wants and buyer server price and a big long list, anything to do with different kinds of elements and components that go into market application, okay? And then finally, the human realm also has these things that allow this to be executed upon, and we're going to put them in implementation too, because whether they're physical or whether they're in the human realm, they are still part of implementation. So in a way, you can think about this then in summary as I have technologies, a world of new and old technologies that through implementation, a variety of factors over here, try to get to the marketplace. And so we now have our three elements. We have our technology element, our implementation element, and our market application element. And so you can see that here. We're going to draw in this class the market like that, and you'll see later that what we mean here is all those different factors are little dots within this market space. Implementation has many different things like we've listed that can be here, and then technology has many different things in it. And this is truly coincidentally, actually, is that market is M, implementation is I, and technology is T, which happens to be also MIT. So it's easy to remember that we are at MIT, but also the model can be thought of the MIT model. So in summary, we started with a definition of innovation, a very simple one, but an important distinguishing one. And that actually set boundary conditions because with that definition of it's an idea, useful embodiment of idea in the marketplace, it automatically introduced a physical realm and a human realm. And although that's already useful itself, as we pointed out, because we try to tell you not to suspend either realm while you're thinking about innovating, the components inside there lead us to the elements of innovation. And there's three elements: market, implementation, and technology. And the rest of the beginning lectures in this class will be talking about thinking about each one of those pieces.